would you pray with me a moment? O Lord, open my lips that my mouth might show forth your praise. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. We live in something of a bubble here in Massachusetts, disconnected from the rest of the country. But this election has taught me two things about ourselves as a country. First, it seems to me that most people of every political persuasion had a negative experience of this election campaign, which ranged from distasteful to appalling to repugnant. The second thing that's so very clear to me today is that we are truly deeply divided as a nation. The people who most strongly supported one candidate hated and demonized the other candidate. And the people who were in the middle talked about the candidates as the lesser of two evils, which is still talk of demonization. Most people I know have been walking around on eggshells for the last year with everyone except for their friends, their closest friends, and their family. We've lived in a country, it seems to me, where everyone, friends, neighbors, church friends, colleagues, everyone is a little Pandora's box. And we're afraid to open up the lid for fear of what we're going to see inside. Because people respond with these very visceral responses of, I can't believe that you support that woman. Or I can't believe that you support that man. And what I see in our country during the campaign and now is, first, there are a lot more angry people in our country than I thought there were. And now there are a lot of people who are very fearful. Now, anger and fear, while these emotions are useful to politicians as a tool to motivate their bases, are not essentially political issues. They are faith issues, which is why I asked Jack to read those lessons from Jesus this morning about casting out unclean spirits and curing people, of saying, do not be afraid, fear not. I mean, how many times is that said in the Bible? Do not be afraid. These are the issues of faith, fear and anger. And what I see in our country is that our world has gotten so small through Facebook and internet technology that we live right on top of one another as we never have before. And we have no idea who we are, each other. We do not know each other as Americans, these two poles of American society. And I fear that we don't want to know each other. Not well enough to be in a community of trust together. And my friends, I am not talking about conservatives and liberals, Democrats and Republicans. What the president, I think, rightly calls two teams in an intramural scrimmage. Imagine Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan working together to make the country go. Leverett Saltonstall and Franklin Roosevelt working together to make the country go. I'm talking about the very angry people in our country and the very fearful people in our country. Now, one thing that I probably have never told you about me is I was a political science major as an undergraduate, and I loved studying political data. So for months now, I've been studying, who are these people? Who are these people and why are they angry? Because they made the difference in the election. And then who are these fearful people? And why are they fearful? Because as people of faith, we ultimately are looking for a meeting place somewhere in the middle, for a better future, not just for me, but for our kids and their kids. So I must begin first by saying I have a confession to make. I only know exactly two hardcore Trump supporters, two that trust community with me enough to say what they really believe. I'm sure there are others, but these two actually spoke with me, two kids from youth group. And I said, so what about Mr. Trump makes you excited? And they said, I am so against Clinton. I am anti-establishment. I want to just blow it up. And then I want to be great again. I'm like, again? Well, okay. And you know, those two boys, I think, put their finger right on the nail. Because those is exactly what the angry people are about. What Trump called out to, he called them the forgotten people in our country. And these are the millions of people, if you looked at the electrical map, of red county after red county, of people who've been left behind by globalization and technology and the need to have advanced degrees to get ahead in our economy. These are people who live in places that are distant from where all the money is being made in the United States. These are people who want someone to go to Washington and drain the swamp, right? That's what they all say. Because they believe that the federal government is bad, if not their enemy. Because they believe that the federal government takes their money in taxes and doesn't do anything helpful in return for them. And they have a strong antipathy to coastal elites. People on the West Coast and people in the very few blue states in the Northeast. And why? Let's be honest. Because we look down on them with all the talk about rednecks and hillbillies and ignorance. And because we, in places like Dover, are doing very well and they are not. And because we demean their values and their identity. What the politicians talk about, guns, gods, and gays. God, guns, and gays. Which really aren't necessarily about that, but it's about identity. And they say they want to be great again. And like I asked the youth groupers again, what do you mean again? Well, specifically, I think there's this myth about America between 1945 and 1965, which are the good old days, right? Some of you were there. I was barely there. And this was a time in American history for you younger people where there were good jobs for anyone with a high school degree. In every small town with a river running through it, there was a factory. And there were thriving downtowns with stores where you could get jobs. And small farms still were economically viable, and people lived near their families, and they were able to buy homes and send their kids to college. Blue-collar folks, like my great-uncles, came off the farm, worked for Ford, and were able to put their kids through college, University of Michigan. Middle class was doing great. My point is, that was truly a great time in American history. And these people are angry because they have been left behind by the two coasts and a government who, let's be honest, isn't particularly interested in North Dakota or West Virginia, except they want their votes, they want their natural resources, they want soldiers to serve in the army, and they want tax revenues. That's a true story. These people have few economic opportunities except to leave. And yet, as we saw on Tuesday night, they are the backbone of our country. These people, my friends, are suffering, which is another faith issue, And they believe that Mr. Trump is going to help them. Now, 1945 to 1965 was truly a great time in American history. No doubt about it. If you were white, if you were able-bodied, if you were psychologically normative, if you were heterosexual, if you were Christian, and if you were a man. If, however, you just happened to be a woman, or African American, or any other minority of color, or non-Christian, or gay or lesbian, or physically or emotionally or psychologically variously abled, the truth of the matter is you were either excluded or segregated or held up as an exception of your kind. Exception to the rule, Jackie Robinson. Exception to the rule, Hank Greenberg. Look at Franklin Roosevelt, even a cripple can do it. Or Eleanor Roosevelt, what a bright woman. Or Liberace. Everyone knew he was gay, but everyone's mom loved his music. And the truth is, and here's my only real critique, that might sound scathing, but we weren't aware of the geopolitical and the environmental and personal health consequences of our way of life back then that we see now in the world. So there's the good old days. And then on the other hand, there are the fearful people. And these people are fearful because what they've seen and heard in the last year. They are fearful because of the seeming delight in talk of violence and force as a political tool. See crowds getting all excited and inspired by talk of punching people in the face and throwing people out of here in the good old days. Every woman I know, fearful. I mean, obviously some of you may not be, but many women have spoken with me and many young women have spoken with me about the characterization and objectification of women and the reputation for certain kinds of behavior I find very disturbing. And then, of course, in the news, we see pictures of the Klan. So anyone who's black doesn't have to go back that far to be afraid. And you have pictures of guys wearing Confederate flags and yelling things like, hang the president, except they're not using the word the president, they're using a pejorative racial slur. Or shoot Mrs. Clinton, but they're not using Mrs. Clinton, they're using a gross anatomical vulgarity for a woman. Or turning to the press and making anti-Semitic slurs at the press. And this makes many people uncomfortable because the thing that separates us from other countries is we don't do that kind of thing. They do that in Nazi Germany. They did that. They do that in Mugabe's Zimbabwe or in Venezuela. And then we have a vice president now who believes in conversion therapy for gays and lesbians. And that makes a lot of people very scared. Or talk of climate change as a Chinese hoax. This is big for me. Climate change is big. And that's a hoax put on by the Chinese? Or Muslims are inherently suspect, or Hispanics are to be culled. The truth is, every group of people I've mentioned in the history of our great country have suffered. African Americans, women, gays, lesbians, Mexicans, people who aren't Christian, they've all suffered, and what they're afraid of is that they're going to go back to that. So, that brings us here to the Dover Church. And let's be honest about ourselves as people of faith. We're not exactly comfortable as proper New Englanders into getting to know each other and what we really think. Even within this little homogeneous church, in this little homogeneous town, in this little bubble we call the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You know, we went through the open and affirming process to declare ourselves welcoming of people who are gay or lesbian, bisexual, transgendered. But we had very little conversation about it. And people said they were afraid. What will someone say? Will it split our church? A month or so ago, I wrote in the newsletter I wanted to begin a conversation about race. Because it's very clear to me that the experience of being white in America and the experience of being black in America are two very, very different experiences, and people don't really understand each other. And only Dexter said he wanted to do it. Was that because no one has time, or are we afraid of what people are going to say? As disciples of Jesus Christ, which, if anything, we are here, that's the thing that draws us together here. Our vocation is very simple, and Jack read it to us. We are here to fish for people, to walk into places of fear and anger, and to help remove the unhappiness, the pain, the unclean spirits, the demons, if you will. And we do not do this for the purpose of growing the church. We do this for the purpose of curing, saving, and resurrecting beloved children of God, them and ourselves. And this is what we can do as people of faith. We can begin practice becoming compassionate listeners. Just listening. Not lecturing, not offering advice, not trying to change anyone else's opinion or their mind, not insisting that they get with our program. But looking in each other's eyes and acknowledging that we hear you. And we hear your suffering and we don't demean it. It's real. And we desire to share that burden with you. When Jesus talks about taking up your cross, that's what he's talking about. One of the things he's talking about is sharing the burden. Because any of you who've had a beloved person in your life who you can share your pains and your heartbreaks and your fears with, just talking to them can make it feel safer and better. Compassionate listening as the Dover Church. Now you may say to yourself, well, what's in it for us? That sounds unpleasant at best. And I would say, ask the people of Northern Ireland. It's not perfect, but they've come a long way from those of you who remember the 70s. Or ask the people of South Africa. It's not perfect. Thank you for coming to church this morning. I'll deal with you later. I'm not going to be compassionate listening. Where's your brother? My wife's away in business in the UK, so it's going to be a long week. But ask the people of South Africa how far they've come in 30 years. Or ask the few people in Israel and Palestine who try to listen to one another, the difference it makes. Because it's through these conversations that healing happens. Communities are built, relationships are formed. We find out who needs to be raised up, how and where, and we discover that all of us need salvation. It's just a question of degrees of difference. My friends, we've tried slavery and Civil War and Jim Crow and interring Japanese Americans and excluding Chinese immigrants and sending gay people to psychiatric hospitals and keeping women barefoot and pregnant. Those were the good old days. And we have also tried leaving entire parts of our country behind, like the Dust Bowl. Like when coal and iron went out in the upper Midwest, or the auto industry failed, or when small farms were no longer economically viable, or where places like my hometown of Worcester, the factories closed and guys didn't know what to do. And they said, go to MIT and get a degree in technology and move into Waltham and you'll be great. And guys couldn't even spell their names. It wasn't an answer for them. Or down south, all those mill jobs that left Lowell and Lawrence and went down there, and now they're in China, and what are those folks going to do? And those too were the good old days. What I would love is that as people of faith, we could trust in God and try liberty and justice for all. And do it by listening compassionately to each other. Amen. If you have a prayer or an offering that you'd like